The bourbon tasted like regret, but I kept drinking it anyway. 3 fingers of Maker's Mark in a glass that had seen better days, much like everything else in this house. The kitchen light flickered overhead, casting shadows that danced across the granite countertops Cleo had insisted we needed 2 years ago, back when she still pretended to care about what we were building together. I'm Lennon Brasken, and I've spent the last 15 years thinking I knew my wife. The front door clicked shut at exactly 9:47 p.m. I knew because I'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes until she'd walk through that door with another excuse about working late at her precious tech startup. Another lie wrapped in designer clothes and that perfume she'd started wearing 6 months ago. The one that smelled nothing like the woman I married. "You're still up," Cleo said, not really a question. She dropped her purse on the marble island with the same careless precision she did everything these days. Calculated indifference. "Hard day at the construction site," I replied, swirling the amber liquid. "Thought I'd wait up for my loving wife." She poured herself a glass of that expensive white wine she kept in the fridge, the one I never touched because it tasted like disappointment and cost more than most people made in a day. Her manicured fingers wrapped around the stem like she was holding something precious, more precious than the conversation we were about to have. "We need to talk," she said. I almost laughed. Almost. That's funny. I was thinking the same thing. Cleo sat across from me at the table where we'd shared 1,000 meals, planned vacations we'd never take, and made promises we'd never keep. The distance between us might as well have been an ocean. Her green eyes, the ones that used to look at me like I hung the moon, now studied me like I was a problem that needed solving. "I've been thinking about us," she began, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "About what we've become." "And what's that?" "Strangers living in the same house." I took another sip of bourbon. "Whose fault is that?" She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. That's when I knew this conversation had been rehearsed, practiced in front of mirrors and maybe with other people. People who weren't me. "I need to be honest with you, Lennon. Marriage doesn't make you the center of my life anymore. I have things more important than you now. Goals, ambitions, connections that matter for my future." She paused, letting that sink in like a knife between ribs. "I need to try life with other men." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just getting started. I set down my glass and really looked at her. This woman who'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me through better or worse. This woman who was now telling me I wasn't worth her time. "Say that again," I said quietly. "What?" "Say it again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly." Cleo's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in that expression she made when she thought I was being difficult. "I said, marriage doesn't make you the center of my life. I have more important things now, and I need to explore other options. Other men." I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording app I'd started when she walked in. Old habit from my military days. Always document everything, trust but verify. The file saved automatically to 3 different cloud services. "That's your choice," I said, my voice calm as still water. She blinked then. Finally. Like she'd expected me to rage or beg or throw things. Instead, I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsed my glass, and placed it in the dishwasher. Normal Tuesday night routine. "That's it?" she asked. "What did you expect? A fight? Tears? You just told me you don't value our marriage and want to sleep with other men. What exactly should I say to that?" We should discuss this like adults." "We just did. You made your position clear. I accept it." I turned to face her, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "But let me make something clear too. You still live in my house under my name and by my rules. If you want to explore other options, you're free to do that. Somewhere else." The color drained from her face. "Lennon, that's not what I meant." "Sure it is. You want freedom? You want to try other men? Go ahead. But you don't get to do it while I pay the mortgage, the utilities, and the insurance on your BMW. I walked past her toward the stairs, then stopped. Oh, and Cleo? Next time you want to have a conversation like this, you might want to check if your husband is recording it first. Her wine glass shattered against the floor as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. Well, my bedroom now. She could figure out where she wanted to sleep tonight, preferably somewhere that wasn't my problem. The home office door had a lock that Cleo had never seen me use. Tonight seemed like a good time to start. I settled in behind my desk and opened my laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard with the efficiency of a man who'd planned for this moment without knowing it. First things first. Joint bank accounts. 3 clicks, and my name was the only one with access. Joint credit cards? Frozen? Her personal account that I'd been foolishly contributing to for years? Transfer pending to cover the mortgage she wouldn't be paying anymore. My phone buzzed with notifications as each change took effect. Bank alerts, credit card companies confirming authorized user removals, investment accounts, updating beneficiary information. The digital dismantling of a marriage, conducted in the soft glow of a computer screen while my wife presumably cleaned up wine and glass downstairs. Next came the documentation phase, screenshots of bank statements, copies of the mortgage papers, insurance policies, tax returns, everything that proved what I'd built and what she'd contributed. The math was simple and brutal. She'd brought debt and ambition to this marriage. I'd brought everything else. But the real treasure was in her second phone, the one she thought I didn't know about, the one she left charging in her car every night, thinking she was clever, the one that had been syncing to our home Wi-Fi for months, backing up every message, every photo, every late-night conversation with people who weren't her husband. Sebastian Klein. That was the name that appeared most often in her messages. Seb to his friends. Senior product manager at her company. Divorced, drives a Tesla, and has been telling my wife how much better she deserves than a blue-collar construction guy like me. The messages went back 4 months. 4 months of planning, scheming, and laughing about the husband who was too stupid to notice. 4 months of intimate details about our marriage shared with a man who saw me as an obstacle to remove. But the real surprise came in a group chat between Cleo, Sebastian, and someone named Ivy Chen from her company's HR department. The conversation from 3 days ago made my hands clench into fists. Ivy. So when are you going to tell him? Cleo. Soon. I'm working up to it. Sebastian. Just remember what we discussed. You need to make him look like the bad guy. Controlling, maybe dangerous. Ivy. I can help with documentation if you need it. HR stuff, you know? Cleo. The house is the main thing. I can't lose the house. Sebastian. You won't. Trust me. Guys like him don't know how to fight smart. I screenshotted every message, every photo, every video call log. The backup files went to secure cloud storage, encrypted and password protected. Insurance for the war that was coming. My phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Roy Hutchins, my oldest friend and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. You sound like garbage, he said instead of hello. Long day. Want to talk about it? I looked at my computer screen, filled with evidence of my wife's betrayal and her lover's arrogance. Not yet, but soon. You know where to find me. The Grey Gull Tavern, Roy's second home and the unofficial headquarters for every piece of gossip in our small Maine town. If you wanted to know who was cheating, who was broke, or who was planning to leave town, you bought Roy a beer and waited 5 minutes. Roy? Yeah? What do you know about Sebastian Klein? Silence on the other end. Then, why? Just curious. He's trouble, Lennon, the kind of guy who thinks his money makes him bulletproof. Why are you asking? Like I said, curious. After I hung up, I sat in the dark office listening to the sounds of my house. Cleo moving around downstairs, probably making phone calls to her support network, telling them how unreasonable I was being. How she'd tried to have an adult conversation and I'd overreacted. Let her make those calls. Let her think she was controlling the narrative. I had work to do. The divorce papers took 2 hours to prepare. Maine is a no-fault state, but it's also an equitable distribution state. Equitable doesn't mean equal. It means fair. And fair meant documenting every asset, every debt, and every contribution to the marriage. The house was mine before we married. The mortgage payments came from my account. The renovations, the furniture, even the kitchen appliances she'd insisted we needed, all purchased with money I'd earned swinging hammers and managing construction crews. Her contribution? Debt from graduate school, and a salary that barely covered her car payment and shopping habits. But the real surprise was the jurisdiction clause, a little-known provision in Maine law that allowed filing in any county where either spouse had resided for more than 6 months in the past 2 years. Cleo had never bothered to read the fine print when we'd briefly rented that cabin in Washington County for her company retreat. The papers would be filed in Machias, 2 hours from our home, in a courthouse where her lawyer connections meant nothing and her sob story would fall on deaf ears. I printed everything in triplicate, sealed the documents in manila envelopes, and scheduled a courier pickup for first thing in the morning. By the time Cleo woke up, the wheels would already be in motion. The last thing I did before bed was change the entry code on our security system, the one that controlled the garage door, the front door locks, and the alarm system. Cleo had never bothered to memorize it, always relying on me to disarm everything when we came home together. Tonight, she could figure it out herself, or sleep in her car. Either way worked for me. I found her on the couch in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at her phone. She looked up when I appeared in the doorway. "The guest room is made up if you want it," she said quietly. "This is my house, Cleo. You're the one who wants to explore other options. Maybe you should start tonight." "Lennon, please. Can't we talk about this reasonably?" "We did talk. You told me I wasn't important to you anymore. You told me you wanted other men. I listened, and I accepted your decision. What else is there to discuss?" She stood up, the blanket falling to the floor. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then the mask slipped back into place. "I didn't mean it like that." "Sure you did. You meant exactly what you said. The only thing you didn't expect was for me to agree with you." I turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Cleo? You might want to call Sebastian and let him know the timeline just moved up. Tell him I said good luck with the house payments." Her sharp intake of breath followed me up the stairs. I closed the bedroom door and locked it, then settled into bed with my phone and started making a list of everything that needed to happen tomorrow. The war was starting, and I intended to win it. Outside, the Maine wind rattled the windows of the house I'd built into a home for a woman who'd just told me I didn't matter. But that was okay. By the time I was done, she'd understand exactly how much I could matter when I put my mind to it. The bourbon had worn off, but the clarity remained, crystal clear and sharp as a blade. Tomorrow, Cleo Brasken would learn what happened when you underestimated a man who'd spent 15 years loving you enough to let you destroy him. Tonight was the last night she'd ever have that power. The alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 8 years. Muscle memory had me reaching for the snooze button until I remembered that everything had changed. Today wasn't about routine. Today was about execution. I showered, dressed, and made coffee while Cleo slept on the couch downstairs. The courier would arrive at 7 a.m. sharp to pick up the divorce papers. By 9 a.m. they'd be filed in Washington County, and the clock would start ticking on a process she didn't even know had begun. My phone buzzed with overnight notifications. 3 missed calls from Cleo's number, 2 text messages, and 17 emails from various financial institutions confirming the changes I'd made to our accounts. The digital paper trail was building nicely. I poured coffee into my travel mug and grabbed my work bag from the kitchen counter. Cleo stirred on the couch as I walked past, but I didn't stop to say goodbye. We were past the point of polite pretenses. The construction site was a 40-minute drive through the kind of Maine morning that made postcards. Fog rolling off the coast, pine trees standing like sentinels, and the smell of salt air mixing with coffee from my travel mug. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated the beauty. Today, it just looked like the backdrop for a war. My crew was already on site when I arrived. Good men, most of them, the kind who showed up early, worked hard, and went home to families that still wanted them there. I envied them that certainty. "Morning, boss," called Jake Martinez, my lead foreman. "You look like someone stole your lunch money. Long night. What's our status on the foundation pour?" We spent the next hour reviewing blueprints, checking material deliveries, and planning the day's work. Normal construction manager tasks that felt surreal given what I'd done the night before. But routine was important. Maintaining normalcy while everything else burned down around you was a skill I'd learned in the military and perfected in marriage. My phone rang at 8:15 a.m., Cleo's number. "Lennon, what did you do to the bank accounts?" "Good morning to you too. Don't play games with me. I tried to buy coffee this morning and my card was declined. Then I checked our joint account and it shows zero access for me." I walked away from the crew, finding a quiet spot near the equipment trailers. "You told me marriage doesn't make me the center of your life. I figured that meant you didn't want to be financially tied to me anymore either." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." "Actually, I don't know it. You were pretty clear last night. You want to explore other men, remember? Well, those other men can start by buying your coffee." Silence on the other end. Then, "This is childish, Lennon." "No, Cleo. Childish would be throwing a tantrum and begging you to stay. This is practical. You want independence? Congratulations. You've got it. We need to talk about this properly." "We did talk. Last night. I have it recorded, remember?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm going to call my lawyer." "Good idea. Make sure you ask him about Washington County jurisdiction laws. Might save you some time." I hung up before she could respond and turned off my phone. The divorce papers would be filed within the hour, and Cleo would spend the day discovering exactly how much of her life had been built on foundations that belonged to me. But I wasn't done. Not even close. At lunch, I drove to the Grey Gull Tavern. Roy was behind the bar, same as always, polishing glasses and pretending he wasn't eavesdropping on every conversation in the place. The lunch crowd was light, a few fishermen, some retirees, and Mrs. Patricia Whitmore from down the street. "Bourbon at noon?" Roy asked as I settled onto a bar stool. This must be serious. "Just a beer, and information." He slid a shipyard ale across the bar and leaned in closer. "What kind of information?" "The kind you're good at. Who's been talking about my wife lately?" Roy's expression shifted from casual to concerned. "Lennon, just tell me what you've heard." He glanced around the bar, making sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "There's been talk. Nothing specific, but people have noticed she's been spending time with that guy from her work. Sebastian something." "Sebastian Klein." "That's the one. Drives the fancy electric car, wears suits that cost more than most people make in a month." Roy paused, choosing his words carefully. "They've been seen together around town, lunch dates, coffee meetings, always claimed it was work-related. But you don't think it was. I think when a married woman starts having regular lunch dates with a single man, and her husband isn't invited, it's not about work." Mrs. Whitmore looked up from her fish and chips. "You talking about Cleo Brasken?" I turned to face her. Patricia Whitmore had lived in our neighborhood for 30 years and had elevated nosiness to an art form. She knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. "You've seen something, Mrs. Whitmore?" "Seen plenty. That fancy car parked in your driveway when you weren't home." Saw her leaving with him last Tuesday afternoon, all dressed up like she was going somewhere special. She took a sip of her coffee and fixed me with a knowing look. Also saw her friend Ivy Chen at your house last weekend. The three of them had quite the little meeting on your back deck. Ivy Chen, the HR representative from Cleo's company, the same woman who'd offered to help document my supposedly controlling behavior. They'd been planning this campaign from my own house. What did you see exactly? Lots of papers spread out on your patio table. Laptop computer. Looked like they were planning something important. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward conspiratorially. Also looked like they were drinking your expensive wine while they did it. I finished my beer and left a 20 on the bar. Thanks for the information. Lennon, Roy called as I headed for the door. Whatever you're planning, be smart about it. Don't worry, I learned from the best. The drive back to the house took me past Cleo's office building, a gleaming glass and steel monument to the tech industry's invasion of coastal Maine. I'd driven by it hundreds of times over the years, proud of my wife's success, happy that she'd found work she enjoyed. Now it looked like enemy territory. Sebastian's Tesla was parked in the visitors section, pristine white paint job, custom wheels, and a license plate that read Disrupt. Everything about it screamed nouveau riche arrogance, the kind of car driven by a man who'd never worked with his hands or built anything that mattered. I parked across the street and waited. Patience was another skill the military had taught me. Good things came to those who watched, listened, and planned before they acted. 20 minutes later, Cleo and Sebastian emerged from the building together. She was animated, gesturing with her hands the way she did when she was excited or upset. He was nodding, playing the role of supportive confidant, the concerned friend who just happened to be sleeping with someone else's wife. They stopped beside his car, and she leaned against the passenger door. He moved closer, close enough that anyone watching would know they were more than colleagues. His hand touched her shoulder, then slid down to her waist. She didn't pull away. I took photos with my phone, not because I needed more evidence of their affair, but because documentation was important. Every picture, every timestamp, every detail would matter when this war reached its final phase. They kissed before she got in the car. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but the kind of kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. I captured that too. The Tesla pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the residential district where Sebastian lived. Cleo wouldn't be home for dinner. Again. I drove home and spent the afternoon in my workshop, building shelves for the storage unit I'd rented that morning. Physical work helped me think, and I had a lot of thinking to do. Every board I cut, every screw I drove, was part of a larger plan taking shape in my mind. By evening, I'd moved 3 boxes of my most valuable possessions to the storage unit: tools, family photos, my military service records, and the antique watch collection I'd inherited from my grandfather. Everything that mattered to me personally was now somewhere Cleo couldn't touch it. She came home at 9:30 p.m., trying to look casual as she walked through the front door. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided making eye contact. "How was your day?" she asked, setting her purse on the kitchen counter. "Productive. Yours?" "Fine. Busy at work." "I'm sure it was. Sebastian keeping you occupied?" She froze. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, just making conversation. I looked up from the newspaper I'd been pretending to read. "Oh, by the way, you might want to call your parents tonight." "Why?" "Someone sent them some interesting photos today. Anonymous email, untraceable sender. They seemed pretty upset when they called me this afternoon." The color drained from her face. "What photos?" "I think you know." Her phone rang before she could respond. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "I should take this," she said, but her voice was shaking. "You should." I listened from the kitchen as she took the call in the living room. Her parents had indeed received photos of her and Sebastian together. Intimate photos that left no room for interpretation or denial. The conversation was brief and brutal. "They cut me off," she said, when she returned to the kitchen. "Financially, I mean. Said they wouldn't support a daughter who cheats on her husband. That's unfortunate. You did this. I didn't make you cheat, Cleo. I just made sure the right people knew about it." She stared at me with something between hatred and disbelief. "This isn't over." "You're right, it's not." I folded the newspaper and stood up. "By the way, you'll want to check your email tonight. Your lawyer should have received some interesting documents by now." "What documents?" "Divorce papers. Filed in Washington County this morning. You have 30 days to respond." The sound she made wasn't quite a scream, but it wasn't human either. Pure rage and frustration compressed into a single note that echoed through the house we'd shared for 8 years. "You can't do this to me." "Actually, I can. And I am." I walked past her toward the stairs, then stopped. "Oh, and Cleo? The locks have been changed. All of them. The security code, too. If you want to sleep here tonight, you'll need to ask permission. This is my house, too. Check the deed. Check the mortgage papers. Check who's been making the payments for the last 8 years. I met her eyes directly for the first time since she'd confessed her betrayal. "This was never your house. It was mine. You were just visiting." I climbed the stairs and locked the bedroom door, leaving her alone with the consequences of her choices. Through the walls, I could hear her making phone calls. Frantic conversations with Sebastian, with Ivy, with anyone who might help her figure out how to fight back. Let her make those calls. Let her think she could outmaneuver me with lawyers and sympathy and whatever sob story she'd crafted to explain away her infidelity. I had something better than lawyers. I had preparation, documentation, and the patience to see this through to the end. Tomorrow, Cleo would discover that her support network wasn't as solid as she'd believed. Tomorrow, she'd learn that the man she'd dismissed as unimportant had been paying very close attention to everything she thought he'd missed. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. But tonight, I slept peacefully in my own bed, in my own house, while my wife learned what it felt like to be locked out of a life she'd taken for granted. Justice wasn't always swift, but it was always thorough, and I was just getting started. Friday night at the Grey Gull was sacred territory in our small Maine town, where deals were made, gossip was traded, and reputations lived or perished based on who bought the next round. I'd been planning this evening for 3 days, ever since Cleo had tried to file a restraining order against me and failed spectacularly. Her lawyer had laughed her out of his office when she couldn't produce any evidence of threatening behavior. Hard to prove someone is dangerous when you're the one who confessed to adultery on a recorded phone call. Even harder when that same someone has been quietly documenting your every move for months. I arrived at the Grey Gull at 7 p.m. sharp, wearing my best jeans and the button-down shirt Cleo had bought me for Christmas 2 years ago, before she'd decided I wasn't worth her time anymore. The irony felt appropriate. Roy was working the bar, and the place was packed with the usual Friday night crowd. Fishermen still smelling of the day's catch, construction workers like myself celebrating the end of another week, and a smattering of white-collar types who liked to pretend they were blue-collar for a few hours. "You look like a man with a plan," Roy said as I settled onto my usual bar stool. "Something like that. Is the back room available tonight?" "For what?" "A private conversation that might get loud." Roy studied my face for a long moment, then nodded toward the back of the tavern. "Room's yours after 8. Whatever you're planning, try not to get me shut down." No promises. I ordered a bourbon and waited. At 7:30, Sebastian Klein walked through the front door like he owned the place. Designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments, a cashmere sweater that screamed expensive, and an attitude that announced he was slumming it with the locals. He spotted me immediately and made his way over, confidence radiating from every step. This was going to be fun. "Lennon Brasken, right?" He extended a manicured hand. "Sebastian Klein, I work with your wife." "I know who you are." I didn't take his hand. Question is, do you know why you're here? Cleo said you wanted to talk, about working things out like civilized adults. I almost laughed. Cleo had lied to get him here, probably told him I was ready to negotiate some kind of arrangement where everyone got what they wanted. She'd underestimated me again. That's exactly what I want to do. Have a seat. Sebastian slid onto the bar stool next to mine and ordered something called a craft cocktail that made Roy roll his eyes. The kind of drink that came with fruit garnishes and cost 3 times what a real drink should cost. So, Sebastian said, settling back with his ridiculous beverage, Cleo tells me you're having trouble accepting that your marriage is over. Is that what she told you? Among other things. Look, Lennon, I know this is difficult, but sometimes people grow apart. Cleo's evolved beyond what you two had together. She needs someone who can match her intellectually, professionally, emotionally. The arrogance was breathtaking. This man was sleeping with my wife and lecturing me about why I wasn't good enough for her. In my neighborhood bar, drinking a cocktail that cost more than most people's lunch, wearing clothes that could feed a family for a week. You think you're that someone? I know I am. I pulled out my phone and opened the message thread I'd been saving for this moment. Screenshots of Sebastian's conversations with his ex-wife, his business partners, and most importantly, his private messages about Cleo. Interesting perspective, I said, sliding the phone across the bar, especially considering what you told your divorce lawyer about her last month. Sebastian's face went white as he read his own words back to himself. Messages where he'd called Cleo a useful stepping stone, where he'd bragged about manipulating her into leaving me, where he'd detailed his plan to use her company connections to land a better job before dumping her. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The question is, does Cleo know you've been shopping her resume around to her competitors? Does she know you've already accepted a position in Boston that starts next month? He tried to grab my phone, but I was faster. Military reflexes don't fade, even after years of civilian life. You're bluffing. Am I? I signaled Roy for another bourbon. Tell me, Sebastian, what do you think Cleo would say if she knew you'd been planning to abandon her the whole time? What do you think her friends would say? Her co-workers? You can't prove any of this. I don't have to prove it. I just have to show it to the right people. I took a sip of my bourbon and smiled. Speaking of which, she should be here any minute. As if summoned by my words, Cleo walked through the front door. She'd dressed carefully for this meeting, the black dress that used to be my favorite, heels that made her legs look incredible, and the kind of makeup that suggested she was planning to seduce someone tonight. She spotted us at the bar and walked over with the confident stride of a woman who thought she was in control of the situation. Gentlemen, she said, settling onto the stool on my other side, I hope you've been having a productive conversation. Very productive, I replied. Sebastian was just explaining why he thinks he's better for you than I am. And I was about to show him something interesting. I pulled out a second phone, the one I'd been using to document everything for the past week. The screen showed a video I'd recorded 2 days ago of Sebastian and Ivy Chen having lunch together. Not a business lunch, the kind of lunch where hands touched across the table and conversations were whispered like secrets. Cleo's confident expression cracked. What is this? Your boyfriend and your best friend, planning your future without you. I pressed play on the video. The audio was crystal clear thanks to the directional microphone I'd borrowed from my construction site. Sebastian's recorded voice filled the space between us. Once I'm in Boston, this whole thing with Cleo becomes irrelevant. She served her purpose. Ivy's laugh was sharp and cruel. She actually thinks you love her. It's almost sad. Sebastian again. The house situation is perfect, though. Once Lennon is out of the picture and she gets her settlement, we can flip it and split the proceeds before I disappear. Cleo stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. This isn't real. It's very real. Would you like to hear the part where they discuss how to make me look unstable during the divorce proceedings? Or maybe the section where Sebastian describes exactly how he's been manipulating you for months? The color had completely drained from her face. She looked at Sebastian, who was studying his expensive cocktail like it held the answers to life's mysteries. "Tell her it's fake," Cleo whispered. Sebastian didn't respond. "Tell her." "I can't do that, Cleo." The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Half the bar turned to look at our little drama unfolding in real time. This was exactly what I'd wanted. A public revelation that would destroy not just their relationship, but their reputations in our small town. "You used me," she said to Sebastian. "We used each other," he replied, finally finding his voice. "Don't pretend this was some great love story. You wanted out of your marriage, and I provided an exit strategy." "And the house? You were planning to steal my house?" "Your house?" I interjected. "Let's be clear about something, Cleo. It was never your house. You contributed exactly nothing to the down payment, nothing to the mortgage, nothing to the renovations. You just lived there." She turned on me with fury blazing in her eyes. "I gave you 8 years of my life." "No, you gave me 8 years of lies. There's a difference." Roy had been watching this drama unfold with the fascination of a man who'd seen every kind of human behavior, but never quite like this. The rest of the bar had gone quiet, everyone straining to hear what would happen next. Sebastian stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. Actually, you do." I didn't move from my bar stool, but my voice carried the kind of authority that made him freeze. "Sit down, Sebastian. We're not done talking." "I'm leaving." "No, you're not." Something in my tone made him reconsider. Maybe it was the years of military training that occasionally leaked through my civilian facade. Maybe it was the realization that he was outnumbered in a bar full of people who worked with their hands and didn't appreciate pretty boys who stole other men's wives. He sat down. "Good. Now let's discuss your immediate future." I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the bar between us. "Inside this envelope are copies of every message you've sent about Cleo, every email you've exchanged with your new employer, and every photo I've taken of you two together over the past 4 months. What do you want?" "I want you to disappear. Tonight. Pack your things, get in your fancy car, and drive back to whatever privileged corner of the world spawned you. Don't contact Cleo again. Don't come back to this town. Don't even think about her." "And if I don't?" I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Then tomorrow morning, these documents get delivered to your current employer, your new employer, your ex-wife's lawyer, and every social media platform where you maintain a presence. Your professional reputation will be destroyed by lunchtime." Sebastian's hands were shaking as he reached for his wallet. He threw a 20 on the bar and stood up again, this time with more urgency. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." He looked at Cleo one last time, and I saw something like pity in his expression. "I'm sorry it ended this way." "No, you're not," she replied. "You're just sorry you got caught." Sebastian walked out of the Grey Gull without looking back. Through the window, I watched him get into his Tesla and drive away, probably forever. One problem solved. But Cleo was still sitting beside me, and she was the bigger problem. "Happy now?" she asked. "Getting there." "You destroyed everything, my relationship, my reputation, my future." "I didn't destroy anything, Cleo. I just revealed what was already there." I finished my bourbon and signaled Roy for the check. "You destroyed our marriage. Sebastian destroyed your trust. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. The truth according to you. The truth according to recorded conversations, documented evidence, and witnessed behavior." I stood up and put on my jacket. "The truth according to facts, not feelings. What happens now? Now you figure out how to rebuild a life without me supporting it. You find a place to live that you can actually afford. You explain to your friends why you threw away 8 years of marriage for a man who was planning to abandon you." I left money on the bar and walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Oh, and Cleo? The divorce papers are final next week. You might want to start apartment hunting. The house goes on the market Monday morning. The last thing I heard as I walked out was the sound of her crying. Not the delicate tears of a woman seeking sympathy, but the harsh, ugly sobs of someone who'd finally realized the true cost of her choices. Outside, the main air was cold and clean, carrying the smell of salt water and pine trees. I drove home to the house that was mine alone now, parked in the driveway that no longer held a cheating wife's car, and unlocked the door that she could no longer enter without permission. Justice wasn't always pretty, but it was always satisfying, and I wasn't done yet. The courthouse in Machias looked like something out of a postcard: weathered brick, white columns, and the kind of New England dignity that suggested justice was more than just a word carved in stone. I'd been here twice in the past month, once to file the divorce papers and once to ensure they'd been properly served. Today, I was here to watch my marriage officially end. Cleo sat at the defendant's table with a lawyer she'd scraped together enough money to hire. Public defender quality, but at least she had representation. Her parents had cut her off completely after the photos surfaced, and Sebastian's disappearance had left her financially stranded. She looked smaller than I remembered. The designer clothes had been replaced with department store basics, and the confidence that had once defined her had evaporated somewhere between losing her lover and losing her job. Yes, she'd been fired. Turns out her company didn't appreciate employees who used HR resources for personal vendettas. My lawyer, Margaret Stone, was everything Cleo's wasn't: expensive, experienced, and armed with enough documentation to sink a battleship. The evidence we'd compiled over the past 6 weeks painted a clear picture of adultery, financial irresponsibility, and attempted manipulation of the legal system. "Mr. Brasken," the judge said, "please state your grounds for divorce." "Irreconcilable differences, Your Honor, and adultery." The word hung in the courtroom air like smoke. Cleo's lawyer objected, but Margaret was ready with the recordings, the photographs, and the message threads that proved beyond any doubt what had been happening. "Mrs. Brasken," the judge continued, "do you contest these allegations?" Cleo's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she shook her head. "No, Your Honor." Just like that, 8 years of marriage were reduced to legal terminology and court records. The property division was swift and brutal. Everything that had been mine before the marriage remained mine. Everything we'd acquired together was divided based on actual financial contribution, and everything she'd brought to the marriage went back to her, which meant she left with her car, her personal belongings, and approximately $12,000 in debt. "This court grants the divorce," the judge announced. "Mr. Brasken, you retain full ownership of the marital residence and all associated properties. Mrs. Brasken, you have 30 days to remove your personal effects." As we filed out of the courtroom, Cleo caught up with me in the hallway. "Lennon, wait." I stopped, but didn't turn around. "I know you hate me," she said, "but I need you to understand something." "What's that?" "You were the most valuable thing in my life. I just didn't realize it until it was too late." I turned to face her then, this woman who'd shared my bed for 8 years and my dreams for even longer. She was crying again, but these tears seemed different, more honest somehow. "No, Cleo, I wasn't the most valuable thing in your life. I was the most convenient." "There's a difference." "That's not true." "Sure it is. I was convenient when you needed someone to pay the bills. Convenient when you needed emotional support. Convenient when you needed a stable home base while you figured out what you really wanted." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "But the moment you thought you'd found something better, you threw me away like yesterday's newspaper. I made a mistake. You made a choice, multiple choices, over several months. This wasn't some moment of weakness or temporary insanity. This was a calculated decision to betray everything we'd built together." She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. We're done here. Permanently. I walked away from her then, out of the courthouse and into the bright Maine afternoon. Margaret followed, her heels clicking on the stone steps. That went well, she said. Better than expected. What's next for you? I looked back at the courthouse where my ex-wife was presumably still standing in the hallway, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life she'd systematically destroyed. Next, I go home, to my house, and I start over. The drive back took me through the town where I'd lived for 15 years, past the Grey Gull where Roy was probably already preparing for the lunch crowd, past Cleo's former office building where Sebastian had once parked his Tesla, past all the places where my marriage had slowly unraveled without me realizing it. But I wasn't the same man who'd sat in his kitchen 6 weeks ago, listening to his wife confess her infidelity. That man had been naive enough to believe in promises, trusting enough to assume good faith, and foolish enough to think love was enough to overcome betrayal. This man knew better. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. Not physically. It was the same colonial I'd bought 12 years ago, the same wraparound porch I'd built by hand, the same garden where Cleo had once talked about planting flowers she'd never actually planted. But it felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I parked in the garage and walked through the kitchen where this whole thing had started. The table where Cleo had sat and told me I wasn't important to her anymore looked smaller now, less significant. Just furniture in a room that belonged entirely to me. My phone buzzed with a text message from Roy. Heard the news. Drinks tonight? I typed back, absolutely. Another message, this one from Mrs. Whitmore next door. Saw the moving truck at your house this morning. Everything okay? The moving truck. I'd forgotten about that. Cleo had apparently hired movers to collect her belongings while I was in court. Efficient of her, and it saved me the awkwardness of watching her pack up the remnants of our life together. I walked through the house, noting what was missing. Her clothes from the bedroom closet, her books from the living room shelves, her toiletries from the bathroom, her laptop from the home office. But she'd left behind more than she'd taken. The coffee maker I'd bought her for her birthday, the throw pillows she'd insisted we needed for the couch, the expensive wine glasses we'd used for special occasions that had become increasingly rare. I gathered up everything that reminded me of her and loaded it into boxes, not out of anger or spite, but out of practicality. This was my house now, and it should reflect the person I was becoming, not the person I'd been when I'd shared it with someone who'd never really appreciated it. The boxes went into the garage, destined for donation or disposal. 8 years of shared possessions reduced to charitable deductions and tax write-offs. That evening at the Grey Gull, Roy had assembled what he called a divorce party. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends, some decent whiskey, and the kind of conversation that helped a man process the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. So, what's the plan now? Asked Jake Martinez, my foreman. You going to sell the house? Move somewhere new? No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'm staying. The house is mine, the town is mine, the life I built here is mine. Why should I be the one to leave? What about Cleo? What about her? Doesn't it bother you that she's still around? That you might run into her at the grocery store or the post office? I considered this while Roy refilled my glass. She's not my problem anymore. If she wants to stay in a town where everyone knows what she did, that's her choice. But she doesn't get to drive me away from the life I built. Mrs. Whitmore appeared at my elbow, having apparently decided that divorce parties were open to the general public. I saw her today, she announced. Cleo. She's renting that little apartment above the hardware store. Looks like she's been crying for a week. Good, said Jake. No, I corrected. Not good. Not bad either. Just irrelevant. Mrs. Whitmore studied my face with the intensity of a woman who'd spent 30 years reading people's secrets in their expressions. You're really done with her, aren't you? Completely. Even if she came back, even if she begged. I thought about this question, really considered it. 6 weeks ago, I might have been tempted by the idea of reconciliation. The old Lennon had been a romantic at heart, someone who believed in second chances and the power of love to overcome obstacles. But that man had been destroyed the night Cleo told him he wasn't important enough to remain faithful to. This man had been forged in the aftermath of that destruction, tempered by betrayal and sharpened by the necessity of survival. Especially then, I said finally. The woman I married doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. Either way, I'm not interested in finding out. Roy raised his glass. To new beginnings. To knowing your worth, added Jake. To being done with people who don't deserve you, contributed Mrs. Whitmore. We drank to all of those things and more. To the end of illusions and the beginning of clarity. To the difference between being alone and being lonely. To the realization that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without the people who tried to diminish you. Later, after everyone had gone home and the Grey Gull had closed for the night, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and looked out at the town I'd called home for 15 years. The same streets, the same buildings, the same ocean visible in the distance. But everything was different now. I was different. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I needed you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Cleo. I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Some mistakes couldn't be forgiven. Some betrayals couldn't be overcome. Some words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. She'd told me that marriage didn't make me the center of her life, that she had more important things than me, that she needed to try other men. I'd listened, accepted her choice, and moved on. Now she was discovering what life looked like when you threw away the one person who'd actually loved you. She was learning the difference between wanting something and valuing it. She was finding out what it meant to be truly alone, and I was finding out what it meant to be truly free. I drove home to my house, parked in my driveway, and unlocked my front door. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Clean, organized, and entirely mine. Tomorrow, I'd wake up in my own bed, drink coffee from my own kitchen, and go to work building things that would last. I'd come home to a house where no one was lying to me, cheating on me, or planning to leave me. I'd eat dinner without wondering where my wife really was. I'd sleep without worrying about what secrets were hiding in her phone. I'd live without the constant anxiety of loving someone who didn't love me back. Cleo had been right about one thing. Marriage hadn't made me the center of her life, but divorce had made me the center of mine. And that, it turned out, was exactly where I belonged. The war was over. I'd won. Not because I'd destroyed her, but because I'd saved myself. The rest was just details.